Sophia DeLoretto-Chudy's story is national news for a few reasons. One, why some of her third grade students in the Austin Independent School District chose to sit during the Pledge of Allegiance on most days during the school year, and if the district should even care. Number two, at what grade level can students comprehend and appreciate a lesson on their constitutional rights? Now, some of you may say they learn it as quickly as possible. Some of you may completely disagree. And number three, how far is too far on social media in terms of policies for public school teachers? Is there, think about this because it matters a lot, is there a policy that works? Should there be any policy whatsoever? Now, that's a good setup to the two videos that went from 20 clicks to 3.5 million in about 48 hours. So it's reported that all of this stuff, I guess the original source of conflict between you and the school, then ultimately the school district, was teaching about constitutional rights. Is that right? And before we get into the TikTok video and all that came with it, I'm sort of curious as a teacher, curious about constitutional rights in the third grade. Explain. And by the way, what do you think a third grader can process in the way of lessons about constitutional rights? So,
yeah, it's kind of funny because the idea of constitutional rights and what does that mean and what does that look like? And in practice in our classroom, what it meant was that during Constitution Week, which happens at the beginning of the school year in the curriculum, the students learned about the making of the Constitution and the Revolutionary War and the amendments on it. And we talked about the importance of the Bill of Rights and how it's uniquely American and how the freedom of speech is not protected in everywhere else in the world. And they became obsessed with the idea of freedom of speech and the right to protest. And they fell in love with protest movements throughout the year. So they wanted to protest.
Now these are third graders, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
They're really smart. Yeah. I know it's really funny to me every time someone's like, this is way too above the head of a third grader. And I'm like, wow, you probably have not spent a lot of time with 8 and 9-year-olds because these kids are incredibly with it. And this is not at all above their heads. They understand what it means. So they became obsessed with protesting everything from snack time to homework and whatever else. And it was later on in the year when they started to understand what the Pledge of Allegiance was for because they asked. They came back to class one day and they asked why we did the Pledge of Allegiance, and we looked it up together. And they wanted to protest the Pledge of Allegiance. And I suggested that instead of doing a loud vocal protest, that if they really wanted to do it, that they could do a silent protest. And sometimes silence is more of a protest than making a big stink and getting in trouble. And so they decided that they would sit for the Pledge of Allegiance. And after a few months, my vice principal noticed and brought me in for questioning.
So they're protesting within your classroom, is that right?
No, so we were doing the Pledge of Allegiance in the cafeteria.
Yeah, like a morning assembly thing with the whole school?
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
Okay. And so
the other students in the school would stand up. Their principal would come around and he'd say, okay, everybody up. And the other kids in the school would stand up and my class would stay seated. A couple of them would still stand. A couple of them were sitting just because they thought it was fun, and some were sitting just because they were tired. But once they found out that it was their right to either participate or not, they became obsessed with that idea and decided to take a stand, or I should say a seat.
So give us an idea, when you go back to your classroom, what's the give and take like, and what do you think or any teacher for that matter, I'm just talking about teaching in general here. So some of your kids sit down, they don't do the pledge, you go back to the classroom. I don't know if it's a talking point or not, but let's assume that at some point it probably was. So what's that conversation like? I mean, what do you think a teacher should or shouldn't say at that point? And then what does a third grader tell you back, why they did it?
Yeah, so the reason why the conversation happened beforehand. So during Holocaust Remembrance Week, there is a mandate in Texas that K through 12 do a lesson on the Holocaust. And I have a couple of Jewish parents in my class who were asking the school, hey, what's the plan for Holocaust Remembrance Week? What are we going to do? How are you going to teach this? And the school administrators were not responding, and so they reached out directly to me, and I took the lead for the whole school to make a lesson plan for the whole school for Holocaust Remembrance Week. It did not go deep into genocide, of course, because that is much too young to be talking about that, but it was mostly about how to recognize propaganda. And so what is propaganda? How do we see it in the current day? Oh, commercials are propaganda. What does propaganda do? It's trying to convince you something. It's through art and different mediums. And then the next day of the lesson plan was, what is an ideology? These are big words. Oh my gosh. Well, it's a word that ends with ism, and racism is an ideology. Sexism is an ideology. Feminism is an ideology. They started coming up with all different ism words. It's a way of thought. So then we, of course, go into what is Nazism, which was unfounded hatred of Jewish people. And then the final day was, why did Hitler bring his ideology to school children? And he had, programs of going into schools and trying to recruit school children to follow his ideology. And we had lots of conversations then about, because, little kids are probably the most susceptible to propaganda. And when you learn something really young, it's hard to unlearn it. And, we had all these wonderful conversations about that. And so it was during that same week, that Friday, the third day of this lesson, that they asked me about why we do the Pledge of Allegiance. And I said, that's a great question. We should look it up. Because despite the fact that, hey, what is the Pledge of Allegiance and why do we do it not being exactly written to the curriculum, when you are in a classroom and a student asks you a question, it is your responsibility as a teacher to answer it to the best of your ability. And we have time in the morning that we usually talk about current events. And so instead of talking about a current event, we decided to do this learning together because I personally forgot why we do the pledge. And it was in looking it up that we realized that the pledge was invented after the Civil War, when the country was still very much divided on the issue of the enslavement of people, and that there needed to be some kind of national unity. And so they created the Pledge of Allegiance, and they made it required to be in schools so that we could increase patriotism. And, they were like, oh my gosh, the word patriotism, it's an ism, that's an ideology. And so, we had some brief conversations about this. And then we were learning about roots of words and word stems. And so, what does pledge mean? What does the word allegiance mean? And we break down the word, and then we were looking at the words of the Pledge of Allegiance. And a couple of my students were just asking questions about it. They were like, well, what's this? Whose God is this? One of my students asked that because her family doesn't subscribe to Christianity. And I was like, well,
is there a school rule about standing for the pledge, a district rule? Is there anything that mandates is, I guess this might be the right word. Is there anything that says you're supposed to stand?
There's not a mandate. It's a initiative is what they call it. There's a district-wide initiative.
What does that mean?
It means that we do it, but there is actually a Supreme Court case that ruled that we cannot require students to stand.
Okay.
So it's an initiative, which means it's something that we all do. It's in the daily routine, but it's not something that you can actually require because legally you can't.
So, I'm sure you've heard from plenty. I can hear people screaming right now. I see. So you, third grade teacher, took the word patriotism somehow or another in the context of Nazism. I'm playing along here. I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure you've heard this plenty of times.
Oh, yeah.
You connected the two. Look what you've done. I bet you've heard that. And how do you answer?
All the time. Yeah. That is not my job to do, and I ask questions, and if they make connections, they make connections. And some kids made connections, and some kids didn't. And it was very interesting to see some kids who had really strong feelings then about the Pledge of Allegiance, and some kids who just found out that they didn't have to do it, and that they had a constitutional right not to do it, and then just loved the idea of having a right that they could express as a kid.
Hey, adults, we can't get along on anything. I'm really curious now about a third grader who you said feels passionate about standing, but then there's a classmate, quite possibly a friend even, that doesn't stand. Like how do third graders manage that, or do they manage it better than adults? And right? I mean, what kind of, do they argue like the rest? Do they fight like the rest of us?
No, the kids manage their disagreements so much better than adults. It's truly incredible. I learned so much from them as a teacher about how to handle conflict and disagreement, and they are much more comfortable disagreeing with each other. I mean, there were some kids that were, like, hey, sit down, and another kid that was like, I still want to stand. I'm going to do it. And they didn't get mad at each other about it. They just were like, oh, that's your choice. This is my choice. Sounds great.
Okay, so here you are at the assembly, and can we assume the rest of the school is standing, and then some of Sophia's class is sitting? Did your kids that are sitting, were they the only ones out of everyone that were sitting?
Yeah.
Okay.
So from January until the end of March, my students, except for all but a few, and the few that would change every now and then, it wasn't always the same few, the entire school would stand when the principal said it was time to stand, and my kids would turn and whisper to each other, and they would stay seated. And they loved this act of rebellion. And one kid, honestly, was just tired.
Okay. So then at some point, the principal calls you in to chat. Was it about this? And how does that conversation go? And then I guess the follow up, since it didn't end well for anybody, I guess, how should that conversation go?
Well, it was very interesting because it wasn't the reason why they had brought it up was because they had noticed, not because a parent was concerned, not because another teacher was concerned or other students were asking questions. It was the fact that they had noticed and that they wanted to question me about it.
By the way, did any parents complain to you?
Not at all. No,
Wow.
My students' parents went to bat for me the second that I was taken into this meeting and then out of the classroom. They demanded that I be reinstated. They were furious that their students were expressing their First Amendment right and that their teacher got removed from a classroom. Many of them said even after I was removed, my students continued to sit. So it was not because I was making them do it, and it was very clear, and the parents knew it too.
So the principal says what to you? Nudge, nudge.
So,
They're supposed to be standing, or
so
did you demand this? I mean, how does that go down?
Yeah, so I had not been checked in with for a while, and I was a first-year teacher, so when they had said that we needed to have a meeting, I thought it was going to be, hey, how's the year going? Do you need any support? Like, how are you liking it? Are you planning on sticking around next year? And instead, I get pulled into this meeting with my vice principal, and she has a list of concerns. And that really took me by surprise because usually when someone has a concern, they kind of bring it to your attention right away. And instead, she had kind of compiled this list.
So nowhere along the way, over months of summer or most of your students sitting during the Pledge of Allegiance, no one along the way said in the hallway or, getting a cup of coffee, said, hey, Sophia, come on, what's going on over there? You may want to get them to stand.
Nope.
I mean, nowhere along the way did anyone even hint to you that that's not going to be cool?
No, which is why I was so confused. Nobody brought it up. Nobody thought it was... no other students even asked what was going on. They just didn't question it.
So then the vice principal says,
right.
Did she address that directly with you, and can they do that?
She said, so on this list that she had printed out, and I had asked her to type it up, when I found out that she had some concerns, I had asked her to write them out so that I could reference them back, and she had written them up and printed them out. And it was like halfway down the list, she wrote out, this is what is written on this paper. I'm looking at it and reading it right now. We've noticed an intentional attempt in teaching your students about their legal and constitutional rights. And the bullet point directly underneath it is what brought about the decision to stay seated. And I explained to her, same thing I just explained to you, but in even more detail about how they came to that decision. And she goes on to say, can the students articulate why and what they are protesting by staying seated. And I said, absolutely, of course. You are welcome to come to my classroom and talk to them. They are super opinionated about the issue. They have all different reasons. They disagree about it. They'd love it if you've asked. She continued to question me. Are they staying seated to please their teacher for personal reasons that they fully understand? I was like, have you ever seen them do anything to please me? I can't even get them to write their names at the top of their papers, much get in line, walk in a straight line quietly in the hallway. You think that they're going to be protesting just to please me. She then goes on to ask, have the parents been made aware of their students' decisions to stay seated in their actions? And I said, not on purpose, not by me. And if they told them, they told them, but it wasn't mine. I didn't send them any kind of notice. I didn't think that would be necessary. What impact do you feel it's having on other students in your class and in other classes? I said that I hope that it would encourage thoughtful conversations, if anything, but that, I didn't see that it would be having an impact because nobody has ever asked us about it. And then went on to kind of suggest, so as we're going throughout these questions too, I'm answering and I'm pushing back, and she's continuing to insinuate that they are not fully capable of understanding what they're doing, to which, of course, I responded, are they understanding what they're doing when they're pledging allegiance to a nation at 8 years old? And she's clearly not caring what I'm saying, and she's continuing to insinuate that I have forced my students to do this, that I've pushed my own beliefs and values onto them, and that this is something that they are only doing because I've told them to do. And finally, she goes on to say...
Can you, let me stop you there, because I know what people are probably thinking. I mean, look, nobody wants to be lectured by the boss, or talked down to by the boss. I think everyone gets that. Yeah. Because she never actually, did she ever come right out and say, hey, look, are you doing this on purpose?
Well, she eventually, we're going back and forth for so long that she eventually goes, we just want to make sure you're not,
right.
What's the word?
Okay, look, so I guess my question would be, it's not, you feel like she's hinting at you're influencing them in the wrong way. I get that. But is it wrong in your mind as a teacher, and I guess parents would have to answer this too, that she might want to know why this is happening? Is that okay or not okay?
I think that it's okay to ask. I don't think that it's okay to insinuate that I'm indoctrinating my students. And she actually went on to use that word. We just want to make sure you're not indoctrinating your students.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I realized that she didn't actually care that they had this incredible lesson and that they were having these thoughtful conversations, that she was merely concerned that there was an appearance of indoctrination.
Okay.
And that's obviously a trigger word at this point. In our current political climate,
absolutely.
That is a trigger word. That is something that we would have never been talking about 5 years ago.
No, that's right.
We have trusted teachers to be professionals. They hired teachers to come teach in classrooms because they liked their teaching. And so to insinuate that a teacher is indoctrinating their students is just, it's ridiculous. It's laughable. Because that would never have been a part of this conversation if our political
by the way, how
climate
do you answer? Because you know this, we all know this. It's the climate of today. You just said it. So how do teachers, not just you but in general, answer back to that assumption that you're brainwashing all of our kids?
That if I could be brainwashing our kids, that I would have the nicest looking classroom, that I would have the best performing students, that I would have the neatest looking line walking down the hall. If I was capable of brainwashing our students in any way, my school year would have gone much differently, and I might have actually gotten to bed before 2 a.m. once in a while.
Yeah. All right. So do you think she was this coming from her own opinions, or do you think that somebody was in the vice principal's ear saying, hey, listen, we're hearing about this. It's just a matter of time before this whole thing blows up?
I really think that it was just her starting to notice. I think that she had personal issues with me, and that this was just another way that she could express those personal issues as well.
Yeah, so then I assume we all assume, rightly or wrongly, that people go to social media to sensationalize themselves and make money. So I'm sure you got a heavy dose of that. How do you answer?
Yeah. If I knew how to make money off of TikTok, I would not be in the positions that I am right now.
Yeah.
I do not know how to monetize. I mean, like, even some of the most, like, the people with the biggest followings on TikTok do not monetize their content. I have a bunch of friends who are young people like me who are not making brand deals and, like, getting money from Target and Coca-Cola. Like, they're just making videos and people are listening to them, and you don't get paid for that. So I don't have any brand deals, nor do I want to be promoted by a corporation of any kind. So that's just not the reason. I was feeling emotional,
the rest of
and
us,
I wanted to vent.
Yeah, there's crazy stories every year about some teacher somewhere and some social media fallout. So I think we all, as taxpayers and parents, we debate all the time about what teachers should or shouldn't be doing. I mean, I guess we could say that about anybody. So what exactly does a public school teacher think they can do on social media?
So what's interesting is I had just that morning completed the district's online training regarding social media. And what I had learned on it was that you are not allowed to post personal information of your students or pictures of their faces without their parents' consent. And so I believed that I did not do anything wrong. I was like, I didn't post a picture of a kid. I didn't even say what school district I was at, like, much less the school or the administrator. I truly believed that I did not do anything that could get me in trouble. And so I was genuinely shocked when this went all the way through and we ended up in the situation that we're in.
So how did it what is the argument by the district that you violated the policy?
So they've changed their arguments a couple times. At first it was you violated the social media policy, which is this very incredibly vague policy about electronic communication that just says you will conduct your personal electronic communication the same way that you would any other public discourse. And to me, I was like, well, this is absolutely not a policy violation then. This is exactly how I would conduct public discourse and how I do conduct public discourse. And so we went back and forth on that for a while. And then when they ultimately sent the actual termination, and they had told me that they had run that by legal and that this was approved by legal and that was enough grounds to terminate. But then when they sent the actual notice of recommendation for termination, they cited a different policy. And they said that the decision was being made for the following reasons: use of a computer, school mail, or any other means of communication that is harassing, offensive, or disruptive to the school operations. I did not use a school computer, school mail, or any other means of communication related to the school. I used my personal phone at my house after school hours.
But clearly the point of you doing it was sort of to say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, to say to the world, can you believe this garbage? Are you kidding me? I mean, that's the way it comes across. Is that okay or not okay? I mean, you're kind of making fun of how, I don't know, fill in the blank there.
Yeah, it was kind of, well, to me, it was kind of like a reality check. You know, like I was like, oh, right, this is the state of the world right now, and the Texas specifically, that teachers are not being respected. And so to me, it was kind of like this wake up moment of like, oh, right, you have to remember that this is the system that you exist within right now.
Is it possible, you know, this is your experience and I guess anybody else's, is it possible to have a zero tolerance policy on social media? Just say, I mean, would you advocate that now? Just say, hey, look, said everybody, it never ends well. You end up in a fight. So let's just all agree just to be quiet on social media during the school year. Is that even possible? Is that a practical policy?
Absolutely not. I think that actually infringes on a teacher's First Amendment right to begin with. Okay. And I would say that in the direction that we're going, teachers are continuing to lead. I mean, really, like, career teachers who would have agreed that was unprofessional are leaving the education, like the system. They're leaving their careers in education because they are facing the same sort of discrimination, this disrespect from administrators, and they are leaving, and we are going to continue to hire younger and younger teachers straight out of undergraduate programs off the street with no formal training in how to operate within a school. And young people, as we know, are taking to social media more and more often and are more willing to take being fired from a job that they don't feel respected at. So I think, one, we could never say don't use your social media. That is a complete violation of the First Amendment. And then two, I think that if you are going to continue to hire students, like young people, 22-year-olds, people who just have bachelor's degrees and don't have educational training, then you need to have some sort of either a better training around social media or some sort of three-strike policy or some nuance. There was no option for reconciliation here. There was no bringing my administrator into a meeting and sitting us down and even saying, hey, what brought you to make this TikTok? Would you mind taking it down? Could you make a follow-up? Nothing. It was just, hey, this went viral. It's bringing us negative press, and we want to shut you down.
Are you suing?
So technically, they did not end up firing me because I would have sued for wrongful termination.
Okay.
And they instead decided to not renew my contract. And the threshold, the bar that you have to reach to have justification for not renewing a contract in the school district is incredibly low. I am filing a grievance, so we'll see how that process goes.
So do you have to clear the grievance to get another job, teaching job? Or does this keep you from getting another teaching job?
This does not keep me from getting another teaching job, although they threatened that over and over and over again. If I was a career teacher who had gone to school for teaching and wanted to continue teaching for the rest of my life, their threats might have actually worked on me, but they didn't because I knew better. This does not, if you file a grievance and your grievance passes, you can absolutely be rehired.
So you go to, I can't imagine what this is like. You're an average Austinite, a third grade teacher. You wake up the next day. I don't know how long it took to get to 3 million, 5 million, whatever million views it is.
Yeah.
I mean, what's that like?
Well, the funny part, too, is I didn't even know at first because I don't have notifications turned on for social media because I have been so busy this year teaching, and they were such a distraction. So I didn't even know until I was taking my students down to their PE class in the morning, and the PE teacher showed it to me.
Wow. So it reached, how many million views has the video had?
I think it's well past 3 million now, but I honestly don't check on it. Yeah. It was at 1.5 when I got pulled into HR later that day.
Wow, that was fast.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of the measurement of pro and con in the reactions?
Mostly in the beginning, it started very supportive. It was like, wow, this is crazy. It was like the same thing that I was experiencing. Whoa, what a reality check that we're talking to teachers this way. And a lot of other teachers, specifically, the ones I noticed the most were other teachers commenting and saying, oh, something like this happened to me. Like, oh, they did this to me. I've had this conversation before. And then it wasn't until the story got picked up by Fox News that I started getting really negative comments. And so that was for, it's been up since March 22nd or 21st or something. So the majority of which had been like all positive comments, and until last week it started to go negative.
So is that the crowd that assumed that you are indoctrinating the kids?
I have to imagine so. That's the trend that it was like a very obvious trend that it followed.
Right.
As soon as it got picked up by Fox News, that's when I started getting doxxed.
A general question about, so do you want to teach again? Do you want to keep teaching?
So I had already decided that this was incredibly hard and that I didn't want to do a full-time teaching position again next year before I had even gone into this meeting. The only reason I got into teaching was because 2 weeks before the school year started, I heard an NPR story that there were over 600 open teaching positions, and I thought that I could just be helpful. And so I had already decided that I would rather be helpful by offering myself up as a substitute while working in some other kind of job. I really am interested in educational policy, and so when I was on administrative leave, I was going to the Capitol during the legislative session, and so many times they were talking about laws and I was the only teacher in the room. And so hopefully I can continue doing something with educational policy. And if I win this grievance, then I'd love to be able to just come back and help as a substitute, because we were desperate for substitutes all year long. I mean, there were so many days.
You're a good person to ask this, because I think a lot of us, particularly parents, the political climate, this is separate to your class and your TikTok video. This is a question in general for teachers. I mean, a lot of us have kids in school. The governor's position that there's no transparency is a bogus claim. It is absolutely not true. There's a ton. It's overwhelming. There's so much transparency. I have to delete emails that I get from my kids' teachers. So these are outrageous claims that come from lawmakers in general about how things work in a school. So I've wondered all along, and I'm sure most other parents do too, are you able just to tune out the noise? Because these are mostly bogus claims. I mean, his thing about parental rights is if we don't have rights and all that stuff. Are teachers able to tune out the noise, or is it getting to teachers in general? Us versus them, jail the librarians, porn in the library claims that are coming out of the Capitol all the time.
So, unfortunately, it did. I mean, the shift really started taking hold after COVID hit and shut down schools. I mean, we had started to already see this, tightening up on how much autonomy teachers had in classrooms already a little bit. But it was really, really took hold when COVID happened and classrooms got shut down. And at first it was, oh my God, teachers are heroes. I can't believe that this is what they deal with every day. I can't get my kid to sit down and do one handwriting worksheet.
Right.
And then the conversation shifted to, when are they going to open up schools, get back to work, your job is to be in the classroom. And that's when this parents' choice, parents' rights conversation really got picked up. And it was definitely, it was most obviously picked up by Ron DeSantis in Florida, and then soon after followed by Greg Abbott. And it is, as you said, it's a lie. Parents have always had choice. We have open enrollment in Austin, and parents are constantly switching their kids from one teacher to another class. That happened all year long. It happens all the time. And so it's been really interesting, because at first that was kind of everyone was like, oh, that's a bogus claim, right? And then we start to see this shift of the conversation about parents' rights and, needing to have more autonomy or more control over what teachers teach in the classroom. That conversation became more normalized. It started very fringe right wing, and then it entered kind of this normalization and into our current, how we talk. And so even there's parents who they're so busy. They have so many things that they have to follow and pay attention to, that when they start hearing their neighbors talk about wanting to have more control in the classroom, that idea is going to pick up and it's going to take hold. And they're not going to they're not going out and researching, how much autonomy a teacher actually has in the classroom and why. But that does start to affect teachers, because they're hearing it. Parents are hearing it. Parents are starting to make these offhand comments that kind of support that idea. And that's part of the reason why teachers are leaving the profession, because they're not trusted as professionals anymore.
Yeah, I wondered at what point is it either fed up and I quit, or both, fed up, I quit, and I'm going to fight you back, because it feels as if, and maybe this is only someone who's in the talk show business, news junkies would know this. Again, maybe most parents just go on about their life, don't hear it. But these accusations that you are pushing porn, and at some point, any professional would say, how dare you make that accusation? I'm really curious why there hasn't been more anger, or maybe there is, we just don't hear it, anger and pushback against these pretty outrageous and dangerous accusations.
Yeah. So there's a lot of fear. Teachers are incredibly overworked. They are depleted of all of their energy at the end of the day, and they are underfunded, absolutely. And your funding, your salary, can get a slight increase if you get a good grade from your administrators. And so you are constantly trying to win over your administrators, and your administrators are, of course, trying to win over the people in the district, and they're following the district, towing in district lines. The people that are hired within the district are not necessarily people who ever spent any time in a classroom. Same with school board members, are often people who have never spent time working in a classroom. And so there is this kind of like silencing effect. So teachers are really afraid to speak up unless something truly terrible happens to them. Like unless they really get fired for like a reason that I did, they're most often terrified of speaking up because the district has become so powerful and so centralized, and your administrators have the ability to either, help you make a couple cents more, but when you're making so little, the couple cents more really, really matters. We had a teacher who at my school pushed back for something, and then despite being one of the most phenomenal teachers that we have at the school, she got a bad grade, which affected her pay because she had an issue with an administrator. And so it's a lot of fear. That is the reason we're not hearing more and more teachers.
You get the bonuses or the raises kick in. I don't know if bonus is the right word. Kick in when there's sort of a positive grade by your boss. Okay. Exactly.
If you get a positive evaluation by your administrator, you get a couple cents more to the dollar. You might also get offered some extra work.
If you don't mind me asking, what is a typical raise? The best raise that a third grade teacher could get in Austin?
It's honestly like $100. Like it's really
$100 a year.
Yeah, it's really nothing. Like you are scraping pennies. And when so I brought home, I think $3,125 a month when I worked, with missed no days, whatever. That's how much money I made.
Okay.
And my team lead only made $200 more than me at the end of the year. Like it is really and she had been working, this is her third year teaching. So you are really scraping by pennies to the dollar, and those pennies, they mean something when you're living on this small of a budget.
How many times do you go back and tell yourself you wish you hadn't have posted the video, and is the video the real reason you were terminated?
Yeah, so it was the video. I think, people have speculated that, the district thought I was a liability, and I'm sure, maybe there were conversations like that happened that I wasn't a part of. But what they said to me was strictly that I had violated the social media policy and that was the reason, and that it was the video itself has caused too many disruptions for the district and for my administrators. I pushed back, of course, and argued that the disruptions that my class experienced were taking a teacher out of the classroom and having no plan in place for what to do with my students. But it was ultimately, the reasoning that I was told was, because you made this video, that's it. And I believe they thought that I was probably a liability and that they were worried about any other quote-unquote disruptions. To my union rep, what that sounded like was I embarrassed my administrator and that they were more interested in protecting my administrator's feelings than doing what was best for the students, especially after I told you, my students' parents were demanding that I be returned to the classroom. That's what they said that the reason is.
All right, Sophia, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I really hope that these conversations can bring about some kind of policy change. It's nothing other than to just have a plan in place for what to do with a classroom full of students if you're going to put a teacher on leave.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sophia. Good stuff.
Thanks. I liked your questions.
Good. Well, I told you, I've got kids, so I get it, man. I sit there and stare at my kid's teacher and think, I feel so awful for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the conversation all the time.
Yeah, I bet.
I bet. Oh.
I know.
And I just got really lucky, too, with my students' parents. Like, they really, really went to bat for me and made sure that I did not feel bad.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, well, good luck with everything. Thanks.
Thank you so much.